Have you ever wondered what your pets see when you don't? Most of the time they're cute, loyal, and comforting. But sometimes they notice things we can't, sounds we can't hear, movements we can't see. And sometimes those things are dangerous. Tonight, I'm sharing 3 true stories, horrifying, unsettling, and unforgettable, of pets who weren't just companions. They were witnesses, protectors, and in some cases, the only thing standing between their owners and something terrifying, from a cat that watched the darkness like it was alive, to a dog who warned its family of a fire no one else could sense, and another cat who refused to leave the attic, no matter how much its owner begged. These aren't just stories, they're experiences people lived through. And they'll make you wonder, what is your pet seeing when you aren't looking? Stay with me if you dare. Story 1. The cat that watched the window. I've always thought cats were mysterious, but I never really believed all that talk about them seeing things we can see until last year. Back then I lived in a small apartment just outside of Portland, Oregon. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. A 1-bedroom on the 3rd floor of an older brick building with creaky floors and a view of the parking lot. I'd just gone through a rough breakup, so I decided to adopt a cat, something to fill the silence. Her name was Luna, small gray with pale green eyes that always looked like she was studying you. She was quiet most of the time, but every now and then she'd stare at something, like she was watching something move that I couldn't see. At first I just brushed it off as a cat thing. But then came the window. There was this big living room window that looked out over the parking lot and the edge of the woods behind the complex. I liked to leave it open for the breeze, especially at night when it cooled down. Luna, though, she loved that window. Every night around 11 p.m., she'd jump onto the sill and sit there, completely still, staring out into the darkness. Sometimes her tail would twitch, slow and deliberate, like she was hunting something. It became part of my nightly routine. I'd watch a show, she'd watch the window, but after a while it started to feel off. One night I was sitting on the couch scrolling through my phone when Luna made this low guttural sound I'd never heard before. It wasn't a meow, it was deeper, almost a growl. Her ears were flat, her back arched, and her eyes were locked on the darkness outside. I stood up and went to look, half expecting to see a raccoon or something, but the lot was empty. Just the usual shadows from the streetlight and the faint outline of the trees. "Relax, Luna," I said, laughing nervously. "There's nothing out there." She didn't move. She just kept growling, low and steady. It creeped me out enough that I closed the blinds. Even after I did, she stayed sitting there, her head tilted slightly up, listening. That became the start of it. Every night after that, at almost the exact same time, Luna would go to that same window and stare. Sometimes she'd hiss softly. Sometimes her fur would puff up. Other times she'd make this strange chattering noise, like cats do when they're watching birds. Only there was nothing there. I tried to ignore it for weeks, but curiosity got the better of me. So one night I decided to sit with her. It was 11:12 p.m. I remember because I checked the clock. Luna was already perched on the sill, staring into the dark. I turned off all the lights and stood beside her, peeking through the blinds. The lot was empty, or so I thought. Then I saw it. At first I couldn't tell what I was looking at. Between the trees, maybe 40 or 50 feet away, was this faint glow. It wasn't bright, just a soft white shimmer. I squinted, thinking it might be someone's phone screen or maybe a flashlight. But then it moved. It glided sideways, unnaturally smooth, not like a person walking. My heart jumped. Luna pressed her paw against the glass and let out that deep growl again. I blinked, and the light was gone. Just like that. I told myself it had to be headlights reflecting off something, but deep down I didn't believe it. I kept the blinds shut after that. But Luna didn't stop. Every night, 11:00 sharp, she'd sit by that window, waiting. Even when I blocked it with curtains, she'd paw at them until I let her look. Sometimes she'd stare for hours, unmoving, her eyes following something invisible. Then came the tapping. It was around 2 a.m. when I first heard it. A soft, rhythmic tap, tap, tap against the glass. I shot up in bed, my heart pounding. The sound was faint, but real, definitely coming from the living room window. Luna was already there, standing on the sill, tail puffed, ears flat. The tapping stopped the moment I stepped into the room. I turned on the lamp. No one there. I walked to the window slowly, every hair on my arm standing on end. When I reached for the curtain, Luna hissed, a long, violent hiss that startled me so bad I backed away. She was terrified. That was enough. I didn't look outside. I locked the window, shut the blinds tight, and went back to my room. The next morning I tried to tell myself I imagined it. Maybe it was just a branch hitting the glass, though I knew there weren't any trees close enough for that. Still, I had to know. I went outside, walked around to the lot below my window, and that's when I saw it. On the outside of the glass, right where Luna had been staring, were 3 faint smudges. They weren't fingerprints. They were handprints, small ones, like a child's. I stood there frozen, my stomach dropping. Who would be tapping on a 3rd-floor window in the middle of the night? There was no balcony, no fire escape, just flat brick wall. That's when I called the property manager. He checked the building the next day and swore no one could access the outside of that window. No ledge, no drain pipe, nothing to climb. He laughed it off, but I didn't. For the next few nights I kept all the lights on. Luna still watched the window, even with the blinds closed. I tried to distract her, but she'd sit there for hours, tail flicking, eyes wide. Then, one night, everything escalated. It was about 3 a.m. I woke up to the sound of Luna yowling, this horrible, drawn-out cry I'd never heard before. It wasn't pain, it was terror. I jumped out of bed and ran into the living room. The window blinds were swaying even though the window was locked. Luna was pressed against the floor, staring upward, her whole body trembling. And that's when I heard it again. That soft, deliberate tap, tap, a tap against the glass. Only this time it wasn't faint, it was right there, inches away. I froze, staring at the window. My heart was racing so fast I could barely breathe. Then something dragged across the glass, a squeaking sound like a nail or a finger moving slowly down the pane. I couldn't move. Luna bolted under the couch. The sound stopped. For about 30 seconds there was dead silence, then bang! Something hit the window hard enough to rattle the frame. I screamed. When I finally found the courage to pull the blinds open, there was nothing there, no one. But this time the glass wasn't clean. There was a streak, long and oily, like the residue from a palm. But again it was too high. Even standing on a chair, I couldn't reach that spot. I called the police. They came, looked around, took notes, but didn't find anything. No signs of forced entry, no ladder marks, no footprints. One of the officers said it was probably kids messing around, but even he didn't sound convinced. After that night, I barely slept. Luna stopped eating much. She'd hide under the bed all day and only come out after dark to sit by the window again, staring silent. I started staying with my sister across town just to get some rest. A few weeks later, I went back to pack up my stuff. I had decided to move out. When I walked in, the apartment smelled musty, like dust and stale air. Luna came out from under the couch, meowing softly. She seemed calmer, almost relieved to see me. I picked her up and walked to the window, the one I'd come to hate. Outside, the trees swayed gently in the wind. Nothing strange at all. Then I noticed something new. On the inside of the glass, faint but unmistakable, were more prints. Small, pale outlines, 5 of them, each about the size of a child's hand, pressed against the glass from inside. I dropped the blinds and never looked again. That night I packed everything and left for good. It's been almost a year now. Luna's still with me, healthy and happy in my new apartment. But every so often, when the clock hits 11, she'll sit by the window, tail flicking, eyes fixed on the darkness, like she's waiting for something only she can see. And when she does, I close the blinds and turn on every light in the house. Because I've learned one thing for sure: if your pet ever stares at something that is not there, don't look. Story 2. The dog that knew before the fire. I grew up in a small town in Northern California, the kind of place where nothing ever really happens. My mom still lives in the same old house at the edge of town. White siding, a creaky porch swing, and a view of the hills that turn gold in the summer. After college, I moved back in for a while to save money. It wasn't so bad. The house had this nostalgic comfort to it. The smell of coffee in the morning, the sound of the wind in the trees out back. And of course there was Scout, our golden retriever. He was my mom's dog, technically, but we were inseparable. He followed me everywhere, to the store, to the park, even just from room to room. He wasn't the kind of dog that barked at everything. He was calm, gentle, loyal. You always hear people say dogs have a sixth sense about things, but I'd never given that much thought. Not until last spring. That's when things started getting strange. It began one night in early April. My mom was away visiting my aunt, so it was just me and Scout at home. I'd fallen asleep on the couch with the TV still on. Around 2:30 a.m., Scout woke me up, not by barking but by whining. It was this low, uneasy sound. I sat up, bleary-eyed, and saw him standing in the hallway, looking toward the back of the house. His tail was down, ears pinned, every muscle tense. "What is it, boy?" I whispered. He didn't move. He just kept staring. I turned off the TV. The whole house went quiet. That heavy, almost humming kind of silence that makes you aware of your own breathing. Then I heard it too. A faint crackling sound. At first I thought it was the heating system, but it wasn't coming from the vents. It was coming from the walls. I walked down the hall barefoot, heart thudding in my chest. Scout followed close behind, whining louder now. I put my hand on the wall. It felt warm. Instantly my stomach dropped. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed the fire extinguisher, and opened the basement door. A wave of hot, smoky air hit my face. I saw the glow before I even got the door all the way open, orange light flickering along the joists. The insulation was burning. I sprayed until the extinguisher was empty, coughing through the smoke. Then I grabbed my phone and called 911. The fire department arrived within minutes. They said it had started from faulty wiring near the water heater. If Scout hadn't woken me when he did, the whole house could have gone up before I even realized it. The firefighters said I was lucky. I knew better. It wasn't luck, it was Scout. He became my hero that night. Everyone said so, but the weird part is, things didn't go back to normal after that. Even after the damage was repaired, Scout refused to go near the basement. He'd stand at the top of the stairs and growl, not loudly, just a low rumble like he was warning me. Sometimes late at night, he'd wake me up the same way he had that night of the fire, pacing, whining, staring toward the back of the house. I'd get up every time, thinking maybe something was wrong again, but there was never anything there. At least, not at first. About 3 weeks later, around 11 p.m., I was sitting at my desk finishing some paperwork when Scout started growling again. This time it wasn't toward the basement. It was toward the back door. The kitchen light was on, but the yard outside was pitch black. He stood completely still, eyes fixed on the glass door, a low growl rising in his throat. I grabbed a flashlight, flipped on the porch light and looked outside. Nothing, just the trees swaying in the wind. "Probably a raccoon," I muttered. But Scout didn't relax. He took a few steps back, teeth bared now. Then came the sound, a faint, slow scrape across the outside of the door, metal against glass. My heart skipped. I shined the flashlight out there. Still nothing. But the scraping stopped the moment the beam hit the window. That's when I noticed something on the glass, a long dark smudge near the handle. It looked like a handprint. I called out, "Hey, who's out there?" But the yard stayed silent. I felt ridiculous yelling into the dark, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there. Scout wouldn't stop pacing until sunrise. Over the next few nights, it happened again. Same time, same reaction from Scout. Growling, pacing, then standing by the door until morning. I checked the security cameras I'd set up after the fire. Nothing. No movement, no figures. Then one night I woke to him barking. Loud, frantic barks I'd never heard from him before. I ran to the kitchen, and my heart stopped. The back door was open. Just a few inches, but open. The lock was still latched, but the frame was splintered, like someone had tried to pry it loose. So I slammed it shut and called the sheriff. They came out, took a report, checked the perimeter. No footprints, no signs of forced entry beyond the crack on the frame. They told me to keep the doors locked and maybe install brighter floodlights. I didn't sleep that night. Neither did Scout. 2 days later, my mom came home early. I told her everything. She thought I was being paranoid until it happened again, while she was there. We were watching TV around midnight when Scout suddenly lifted his head and started growling at the window by the couch. His fur stood up along his back. My mum looked at me, confused, and then we both heard it, a faint tapping sound from outside. We froze. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. 3 short taps, then silence. My mum grabbed her phone to call the police again, but by the time they arrived, whoever it was, if it was a person, was gone. That night, I moved a chair in front of the back door and slept in the living room with Scout by my side. Every small noise made me jump. The next morning, I went outside to check for footprints again. The dew had settled overnight, so the grass was damp. And that's when I saw it, about 10 feet from the porch leading toward the tree line. Footprints, but not adult ones, small, bare, like a child's. The sheriff came back, looked at them, and said they probably belonged to a neighbor's kid. But our nearest neighbor was a quarter-mile down the road, and there was something else. The prints weren't heading away from the house. They were coming toward it. We tried to brush it off, but from that night on, Scout refused to go outside after dark. He'd bark at the door, but back away if I tried to open it. It was like he was protecting me from something I couldn't see. Then, one morning, I woke to find the porch light shattered. Tiny bits of glass scattered across the steps. On the wooden frame beside the door, written in charcoal or ash, were 2 words, "Still here." I called the police again, but they couldn't find any evidence of who did it. They offered extra patrols, but nothing more. My mom was terrified. She started staying with a friend in town. I stayed behind with Scout, partly to protect the house, partly because I needed answers. I set up new cameras. This time not just by the doors, but in the trees behind the property too. Motion activated, night vision, everything. The first 2 nights, nothing. On the third, around 2:40 a.m., the alert went off. When I checked the feed, I felt my blood run cold. At the edge of the woods, just inside the tree line, there was movement. Small, crouched. A shape. For a moment it stepped into the light. It looked like a child, but its posture was wrong, too low, too still, and its face, I don't know how else to say this, but it wasn't clear. Like the camera couldn't focus on it. It stayed there for maybe 10 seconds. Then it turned and walked straight toward the house. The feed cut out right after that. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. By sunrise, I'd packed bags for both me and Scout. We left that morning and haven't been back since. A week later, the sheriff called me. He said something strange. They had been investigating a missing persons case. A boy from the area who disappeared nearly 30 years ago. The old property records showed his family used to live on that same land before our house was built. The cause of the fire that destroyed their home back then? Faulty wiring, the same place where ours had started. I didn't know what to say. I just hung up. Scout's old now, slower, grayer around the muzzle, but he still gets uneasy whenever there's smoke or when the wind blows against the windows. And sometimes late at night he'll lift his head, stare toward the door, and start to whine, just like he did that night before the fire. When that happens, I don't ask questions anymore. I just check the locks, turn off the lights, and stay close to him. Because the one thing I've learned is this: dogs don't lie. And when they're scared of something you can't see, you should be too. Story 3. The cat that wouldn't leave the attic. I moved into my first house in October of 2017, a small 2-bedroom place in upstate New York, built sometime in the 1940s. It wasn't anything fancy, but it had charm. Arched doorways, hardwood floors, even a little attic with a pull-down ladder. The place had been vacant for a while. I remember the realtor mentioning that the last owner had moved out suddenly, which didn't seem like a red flag at the time. I was just happy to finally have my own space. About a week after moving in, I decided to adopt a cat, a black short hair named Luna from the local shelter. She was quiet, curious, affectionate in her own way. It felt right to have another living thing in the house, but from the moment I brought her home, she was different. When I opened the carrier, she didn't explore like most cats do. She just stood there, ears back, eyes wide, and staring up. Not around, not at me. Up toward the ceiling. Specifically toward the hallway ceiling where the attic ladder was. I laughed it off at first. "You see a bug or something?" I joked. But she didn't move. Her tail puffed up and she hissed, this low trembling sound that didn't match her small frame. I didn't think much of it then, but over the next few days it became unsettling. Every night around 11 p.m., she'd walk out into the hallway, sit directly under the attic door, and stare straight up. Sometimes she'd meow, softly like she was calling to something. Other times, she'd growl. If I tried to pick her up and move her, she'd scratch at me to get down and go right back to the same spot. I mentioned it to a friend of mine who's big into cats. She said maybe Luna was hearing mice in the attic. Sounded logical enough. So, one weekend, I decided to check. The attic wasn't big, just a dusty crawl space with old insulation and wooden beams. I climbed up with a flashlight and looked around. No mice, no droppings, no signs of anything living up there. But something did catch my eye. Near the far wall was a small wooden trunk, old with rusted metal latches. It looked like it had been there for decades. I hesitated, then flipped it open. Inside were a few yellowed papers, a broken porcelain doll, and a photo. The photo was black and white, probably from the 1950s. It showed a little girl, maybe 7 or 8, sitting on the same porch that was now mine. She had dark hair, a plain dress, and was holding a cat. A black cat. I didn't think much of it until I looked closer at the back of the photo. Someone had written in faded pencil, "Luna, 1956. I froze. My cat's name, the same as the one in the photo. It could have been coincidence, probably was, but it felt strange. That night, Luna was restless. She prowled the hallway, meowing louder than ever, pawing at the base of the attic ladder. Around 2 a.m. I heard it, a thump from above. Not like something fell, more like a footstep. I held my breath, listening. Then another thump, and another. Luna arched her back, hissed, and bolted under the bed. I grabbed a broom, like that would actually help, and pulled the ladder down. The noise stopped immediately. I climbed halfway up and shined my phone flashlight around. Nothing, just shadows and dust. I stood there for a while, listening to the silence. Then faintly I heard it again, but this time it wasn't coming from the floorboards, it was coming from the corner. A faint scratching sound, steady, deliberate. I pointed the light in that direction and my stomach dropped. There were fresh claw marks on the wooden beam, deep ones, the kind a large animal might make, or something trying to get out. I scrambled down, shoved the ladder up, and decided to deal with it in the morning. The next day I called an exterminator. He came, inspected the attic, and said there were no animals, no droppings, no entry points, nothing. He even showed me a thermal scan, no heat signatures. But that night, the noises came back. This time it wasn't scratching, it was pacing, slow, deliberate pacing, and back and forth directly above my bed. I didn't sleep at all. Over the next few nights it got worse. Luna refused to eat. She'd hiss at empty corners. Once, while I was brushing my teeth, she darted into the bathroom and started clawing at the vent near the ceiling. That's when I heard it. A faint, childlike giggle echoing through the duct. I dropped the toothbrush. The sound stopped immediately. I told myself I was tired, imagining things, but deep down I knew I wasn't. The next day I decided to get rid of that photo. I didn't even want it in the house. I went up, grabbed the trunk, and started carrying it down the ladder. Halfway down I felt a rush of cold air, like the temperature dropped 10 degrees in a second. Luna started screaming from the hallway, this guttural yowl I'd never heard before. And then, clear as day, a voice behind me whispered, "She doesn't want to leave." I dropped the trunk. It hit the floor, spilling the photo and the doll across the hallway. Luna hissed, then ran straight at the attic door, pawing at it, crying. When I looked back, the ladder had pulled itself halfway up. I moved out 2 weeks later. When I went to hand the keys to my realtor, she gave me this sympathetic look and said, "You lasted longer than the last few owners." I asked what she meant. She hesitated, then said quietly, "The family that built that house had a daughter named Lucy. She died in the attic in 1956. No one's sure how, but after that, people kept reporting strange things, especially with cats. The last owner swore her cat would just vanish up there." I didn't ask any more questions. Now every time Luna stares at a ceiling or follows something with her eyes that I can see, I get that same chill in my stomach. And sometimes late at night, I'll wake up to find her sitting on the dresser and staring up toward the ceiling, always the same direction, always the same time. 11 p.m. And if I listen closely enough, I can still hear it sometimes, that faint scratch. Scratch, scratch it from above. I've learned not to check anymore, because whatever's in that attic, it isn't a mouse, and it isn't gone. Those were 3 unnerving stories of pets who encountered the unexplainable, each one a chilling reminder that sometimes animals see the world differently than we do. Scout, Luna, Max, Jenny. Each of them warned their owners, protected them, or refused to ignore something hidden in plain sight. And sometimes what they sense is something we're better off not seeing. If you enjoyed these stories and want to hear more true tales of pets encountering the unknown, make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and leave a comment below telling us which story unsettled you the most. And next time your dog stares at a corner, or your cat won't leave the attic, maybe it's worth paying attention because your pet might be seeing something you're not. Remember, stay alert, stay safe, and always trust your pet.